Hi everybody, and welcome to Software Sutra's JavaScript Fundamentals. In this video I'm going to be talking about a number of basic abstractions that we use when doing web development. But first I'm going to talk about the basic for loop. Many of you are already familiar with the for loop. It allows us to define a block of code which will be repeated a number of times. So at the top here we have a space for defining variables which will be local to our block of code so long as we use the let declaration. And we also define an expression which, so long as it resolves to true, we will continue executing our block of code. And we have another space here which allows us to increment the variables that we've defined so that our truth condition here will eventually resolve to false. So we let I equal 0, and so long as I is less than 10, we increment it and execute this block of code. Now inside this code block, I'm console logging I. So if we put this in our Chrome developer tools, we will of course see that it prints out the numbers 0 through 9, which is the value of I at each iteration of this code block. And then finally returns undefined because our for loop doesn't return any values. It just executes that block of code over and over again until this expression resolves to false. Now, for loops are very useful. The for loop is a native construction, which means that it's built into the JavaScript interpreter, and it's, as a result, very fast. We can create an array of numbers, and we can use our for loop to print out each number in the array by setting the maximum number of iterations to the length of our array. Now this, when we paste it into our console, will print out the numbers 1 through 6. Great. And of course, it doesn't have to be numbers. It could be an array of objects or strings or whatever. Now this is very useful, but sometimes we want to have a more functional approach, and we want to create some abstractions which are a little bit more reusable than this. So the first abstraction I'm going to talk about is the forEach function. Now forEach is a function that takes an array and it iterates over the array, passing each item in the array into a function supplied by the user. So what do you think the body of this function is going to look like? Of course, as you probably guessed, we're going to need a for loop. And we're going to start that for loop at 0 because all arrays are 0 index. The first index in each array is 0. And we want to stop repeating when we've reached the length of the array. Okay, and we can do something a little bit better here. We can calculate the length of the array ahead of time, store it in a variable. There we go. And we want to take each item in this array at each index and pass it into the function that we get when we invoke forEach. So let's first get our item from the array. The item is the array item at index I. And then we want to pass it into our function just like this. Perfect. Simple enough. Okay, so now we have a forEach function, but we haven't done anything with it yet. We also have an array, our array of numbers, to pass into forEach, but we don't have a function yet. So let's make one up. We can create any old function like square, which takes a number and returns that number times itself. Pretty simple function. Okay, and then we can execute our forEach. We can invoke forEach with the numbers array and the square function, and this should give us the square of each number in our array. Let's get rid of our old for loop and put this into our Chrome developer tools and see what happens. Interesting. Nothing happened. Well, that's because in each iteration of our for loop, we're passing the item, which is a number, into our function, which is square, and we're returning the result, but we're not doing anything with it. The result just gets lost somewhere in this for loop. It gets garbage collected because it's not stored anywhere, it's not being printed out, or anything like that. Now, we could modify our forEach to console log the result of this function, which is a little silly, but at least it'll show us what's happening. So we can tell Chrome that we want to redefine our forEach function here. And then we can invoke with numbers and square one more time. And there we see our squares.